Arc 6, Chapter 84, Heave ho! Heave ho! Stabilizing the image was essential in constructing ice in accordance with imagination. Back when Subaru had initially proposed, ice brand arts to her as well, she had considered it to be incredibly handy, but Emilia remained insecure whether she would be able to pull it off. Subaru, it's all right, no need to worry, Emilia-tan will surely be able to do it. So ascertained Subaru to an uncertain Emilia with his thumb raised, she recalled. Now that she thought of it, that too had been completely unfounded no. Emilia believed Subaru had supported her back with his reason being, because I love you. In the course of creating weapons she imaged, Emilia studied a lot of illustration. Unlike songs, studying illustration wasn't a specialty of hers, yet, by drawing time and time again with Subaru, she was met by definite improvement. From the sidelines during her studies, watching Emilia draw with Subaru and Beatrice, Ram was amazed, Otto smiled wryly, Frederica and Petra occasionally joined in, and Garfield advised her on what would be better. Roswell, too, observed Emilia and Beatrice drawing from a distance every so often. For Emilia, these were reminiscences tremendously, immensely valuable, exigent to part ways from. Reminiscences which have, though disappeared for everyone, which were remembered by Subaru. Upon the advent of that thought, a warm emotion surged deep within her chest. Emilia, I shall change that into courage with a Heave. Upon the motive power of the surging emotion, accompanied with the weapons of ice she had produced, and the 7 soldiers of ice which advanced alongside her, Emilia tackled the divine dragon Volcanica before herself. As per the aforementioned explanation, the image was essential in the shaping of ice. Naturally, that was the case with weapons, but also with the soldiers of ice brought forth. In other words, the soldiers of ice had been configured to a shape easy for Emilia to image. To summarize, fighting alongside Emilia were 7 Natsuki Subarus. Emilia, but they're more powerful and quick than the real Subaru, so. Though Subaru wouldn't lose in naughtiness and frolicsomeness either, his structure differed from that of the soldiers created with ice from its very foundation. The soldiers' strength depended on the density of the mana bestowed upon them by Emilia, and could not be compared with simple sculptures of ice. They were the same as weapons of ice, and no less than steel. Emilia, go! Abiding by Emilia's command, the ice warriors dashing in the vanguard plunged into Volcanica's range. Volcanica did not move, remaining reclined on the colossal pillar in the center of the first layer of the watchtower, and the range of its earlier tail whip was 4 to 7 meters. That instant, as if it had detected the will to hold fast to the pillar, it swung its blue dragon tail with great velocity. Making an eccentric sound which could only be described as a hole opened up in the air, the following moment, the upper bodies of the ice warriors in the vanguard got smashed to smithereens. Having bathed in the direct hit from the area of their chest, the trunks of the ice warriors shattered into 2 at that spot, as their heads, taking after Subaru and the sharp look of his eyes, were blown off. Emilia, sorry, but you would have been aimed for regardless of my presence. Apologies to the soldiers of ice turned to touchstones, but now she precisely understood Volcanica's aim. Though the divine dragon had gotten Alzheimer's, had blanked out about the trial as well, the will to intercept all opponents distinctly aiming for the pillar yet remained alive within it, regardless of the existence or non-existence of its life. Henceforth, she wielded a course of action. Emilia, soldier sans, please. In concert with Emilia's voice, the ice warriors jumped in order to overtake the silver-haired young girl. The first one was shattered, leaving 6 ice warriors. Each fell in respective separate directions, and headed towards the central pillar whilst creating a faint difference of time. Volcanica, thou, who hath reached the top of the tower, step forth through the first floor, almighty petitioner. Sensing the presences of the approaching ice warriors, the divine dragon repeated its vocal message yet again, seeing it relay that which was not but an enumeration of words now devoid of meaning, to dolls possessing no ears to hear from, made Emilia feel potent desolateness and a heart-wrenching sense of misery. Despite having been turned to this shape, Volcanica was trying to protect something, though she did not know with whom, with what, and for what purpose had it exchanged that promise. Volcanica, I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, I ask the will of thee who hath reached the summit. Within the blink of an eye, 2 of the ice warriors armed with weapons were shattered with a swing of the tail. Though each had taken a defensive stance as an instantaneous response, one had everything below its waist blasted off. The other had its right half of its body subjected to the same, as they crumbled, unable to make any decent movement. Hence, the remaining 4 headed for the tail, returning to its original position from the attacking stance to place a check on it. It may be possible that not simply Alzheimer's, but its legs and loins had become weaker and unsteady as well. If it was in a state where simply standing up was arduous for it, then pinning down that tail would be sufficient. Emilia, brace yourselves. With the aim of immobilizing the tail, 3 ice warriors joined their arms together, attempting to mow down those ice warriors all at once. Yet again the tail of the divine dragon deserted sound behind. Though similar to the whip Subaru used in arrangement, its pace and might was in an entirely different league. Had it been Subaru's whip, then Emilia could have caught it bare-handed, but that would be impossible for the dragon's tail whip. Potency which would have taken any ordinary living being's entire might, the divine dragon hurled it with listlessness akin to brushing away insects. The impact brought forth by that tail once again struck the 3 ice warriors lined up side by side with lowered waists. However, the shattering resonance supposed to have echoed did not resound here, for she had generated a wall of ice behind the 3 ice warriors with lowered waists, which supported them. Should she know the strike was coming, she had countermeasures prepared. Despite the entirety of their bodies developing cracks, the ice warriors, taking after the young boy with a sharp expression of eyes, raised the edges of their mouths. And from the rear of the 3 who had halted the impact, the remaining final one jumped ahead, having been charged with a separate role. What the final ice warrior wielded was a weapon known as a sasumata. On the spearhead of the handle, similar to a long arrow, a curve-shaped fitting with the purpose of not stabbing but subduing the opponent was fixed, seemingly called so for its usage as a catcher. Using that sasumata to thrust it down, it pinned the divine dragon's ill-mannered tail down onto the floor. The dragon tail, having ceased movement, even its utmost slim end of the tail was bulky like a log and impossible of being held back by simply one sasumata, so the cracked 3 successively tackled with sasumatas as well. And 4 convenient points were arrested by the sasumatas, and even the divine dragon had its tail blocked. Volcanica, thou who hath reached the top of the tower, step forth through the first floor, almighty petitioner. The subsequent instant, with a sound of the world being splintered, the 4 leaping bodies of the ice warriors were gouged in their entirety. Everything upwards of their hips had vanished cleanly, and with only their lower bodies left, the ice warriors crumbled. The one responsible was not the tail having gotten serious after being immobilized, but claws. Whilst on the floor, Volcanica used its left frontal limb instead of its tail. By merely that, Emilia's soldiers of ice had been extinguished with certainty and without escape. She narrowly escaped being tricked into believing it had become infirm. Emilia, if both the limbs and the tail are doing well, then why did just your important brain get blanked, damn it? Volcanica, I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, I ask the will of thee who hath reached the summit. Emilia, I get it already, for God's sake. Repetition which would have driven anyone into further frenzy aside from Emilia. Despite having to hear it, Emilia's resolved spirit of challenge shan't shatter. What could be shattered were only the soldiers of ice, though naturally, that did slightly hurt her heart. Emilia, it's all right. It's not as if I didn't get to know anything. Asserting that the death of the shattered ice warriors had not been in vain, Emilia too headed towards the tail's range. However, the sasumatas of ice suppressing the tail were going strong, rendering the sacrifice of the 4 ice soldiers worthwhile. Thus, naturally, claws would now aim for Emilia instead of the tail. But Emilia, the range which both of your hands reach is shorter than the tail, yes. And also, before those claws could seize Emilia, ice spears passed by Emilia and drew near the divine dragon. They had been hurled by ice warriors brought forth once again in Emilia's rear. At their original positions, the maximum number of ice warriors Emilia could create was 7. but it was possible for them to be recreated whenever they got shattered. In other words, the ice warriors could stand up again however many times until Emilia exhausted her strength, precisely like the true Natsuki Subaru. Volcanica, thou, who hath reached the top of the tower, step forth through the first floor, almighty petitioner. Emilia, Kaya. Upon the incessant downpour of ice spears outside of its range, Volcanica slammed its forelimbs into the front. That singular strike seemed as if rending space, producing a shock wave that appeared to be an eternal mark of its claws, swallowing the entirety of the first layer, including Emilia and the ice warriors. Whilst halting the impact on her body brought by the shock wave, Emilia strained her amethyst-colored eyes. The central pillar Volcanica was protecting. Its firmness was solid, and she had not been able to carefully observe the pillar yet either. From a distant view, it appeared to be no different from the other 5 pillars, but that judgment too was premature. However, what Emilia sought utmost here, instead of the central pillar itself, was Emilia, located on its top, the tower's summit. Undauntedly stepping into the wind, Emilia kicked the floor with might on that very spot. She was yet too distant to take any action regarding Volcanica or the pillar. However, stepping ahead here was the correct answer. For the ice warriors, restored from their initially shattered states, lowered their waists and braced their arms, and, catching Emilia's feet as she stepped ahead, assisted her into a leap towards greater height at once. Having pinned down the tail, directing its attention to the pillar, she used that interval and headed towards the uppermost stratum which she sought the utmost. Though a combination Emilia would not recklessly use either, Emilia's intuition, having reached this far, implored that the summit was one which must be reached. The great leap which borrowed the ice warrior's assistance, using it to jump above Volcanica's head at once, she made for the topmost surface of the pillar. Should she simply ascend to the uppermost stratum from there, Emilia? The heck! The following instant, whilst Emilia attempted to make her fingers reach the pillar, a tranquil heat wave grazed her feet. No, it was not tranquil. Sound had simply died at the hands of its exceeding might and heat. If it had killed the very concept of sound, it would be no enigma for it to have converted to a soundless phenomenon. Emilia's perception detected the extinguishment of the ice warriors deployed across the first layer, the one which had lent its hand to shield Emilia's vision, the 4 which had thrown ice spears in its support, the 2 which had sprinted for supplementing Sasumatas, disappeared at the same second. And what accomplished this was neither Volcanica's tail nor its forelimbs. Volcanica, I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, I ask the will of thee who hath reached the summit. Yes, the death wail of scorching air was heard from its mouth, which never parted solely with its majesticness. With the arrival of another one of its reiterations into her ears as a start, Emilia comprehended the resuscitation of the killed concept of sound, whilst at the same time, her fingers reached for the pillar's topmost surface. Somehow desperately fixing her body, Emilia looked down below. There spreading wide was the first layer, scorched white. White fumes akin to smolders rose from multiple spots, with not even the wreckage of the ice warriors supposed to have existed left behind. Such heat, such might, such annihilation. The breath of the divine dragon Volcanica had burnt all to naught. Emilia, both the tail and the legs are doing well, can even spit goddamn fire, and yet, Volcanica, thou who hath reached the top of the tower, step forth through the first floor, almighty petitioner. Emilia, good Lord, I get it. I do understand. I get it so. Oh. Responding with a lack of grievousness taking into account the events that had occurred, Emilia widened her eyes midway through. Steadily, the eyes of the divine dragon aimed upwards, the yellow eyeballs reflecting Emilia within themselves. And Volcanica, I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, I ask the will of thee who hath reached the summit. Whilst pronouncing so, Volcanica unfolded both of its blue wings and stood up at its position. The scene changes. Emilia, oh hell no, hick. Comprehending the hazard of the events occurring below, Emilia extended her hand towards the topmost surface of the tower in great panic. In the interlude, she was preoccupied with that. Volcanica deracinated its tail, being restrained by the Sasumatas, and sought to slowly flap its wings. It intended flight. It was, after all, the divine dragon Volcanica. Flying for it would be a matter of course, but since Emilia had never witnessed a flying dragon, her sense of reality had been puny. First of all, would a creature with a body so gigantic truly be able to soar in the skies? Emilia, I've only ever seen Puck and Roswal fly too. It was ineluctable for Puck, a spirit, and Roswal, an eccentric magician, to fly. From what she had heard, in the southern Valatia Empire, just like ground dragons or water dragons, there existed flying dragons named winged dragons, so Volcanica was possibly also considered as a winged dragon. Or perhaps, to categorize dragons and the dragon as the same may be an in itself, Emilia. Heave ho! Heave ho! Hiya! Sha! Letting out an enthusiastic cry, Emilia clambered towards the tower's top at her greatest possible speed. Though from a distant view, her speed was jaw-droppingly astonishing. Even if Emilia were to make fortunate effort beyond common sense, she lacked one card to be able to desert everything behind and dash on ahead. Volcanica, thou who hath reached the top of the tower, step forth through the first floor, almighty petitioner. She was not hallucinating to be hearing that voice from a distance closer than before, for she had not managed to desert everything below her behind. The pronouncement had ascended to the same altitude as hers. Unfolding both of those blue wings, an unbelievably humongous frame fluttered midair. Majestic and dignified, the divine dragon Volcanica soared into the dune's sky with pressure of presence ignorant to its decline. Its evolving air of intimidation, or the glint in its eye glaring the opponent impotent, its tail or its forelimbs, even its breath, none of it turned traitor to it being a hyperrank dragon chronicled in legends. However, the singularity which did turn traitor to that Emilia. I intend to go above the first layer so I may not be your enemy. Volcanica. I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, I ask the will of thee who hath reached the summit. Poured with a voice conveying it possessed no ears to hear from. As Emilia clung to the pillar, Volcanica's menace resumed pursuit of her. Inhaling, Emilia gritted her molars and borrowed the power of a foothold which did not exist there and jumped over the tail whip. Emilia. Yahoo! Practical usage of ice brand arts rather than clambering up that pillar, she installed footholds at its flanks, accelerating her speed by jumping above them. Emilia. Would the limbs become free too? Kia! The instantaneously drawn twin swords of ice energetically repelled the slamming tail away. A strike swung whilst relying on guesswork. Both of Emilia's arms, from her wrists to her elbows, went numb due to the vigor, rendering her seemingly unable to wield another novel weapon for the multiple seconds it would take her to stand up. However, unlike the damage taken by Emilia, Volcanica had simply swung its tail. Despite its transiency, the divine dragon witch resumed to undertake the same conduct before the challenger swung its tail, its endeavor being to to crush the opponent seeking to capture the pillar. Emilia, hic! Emilia's breath was packed in response to that approaching tail. Should she be repelled once, she did not perceive she would have enough stamina left to reach the pillar once again. Should she suffer a direct hit from the tail notched with scales, she would surely be left in a terrible state. She could not let that tail's attack connect. Emilia, I can still work Rhea Ellie hard. She could not use her arms. However, she could move her legs. She could aim for the top. Though she had created footholds in order to aim for the top, that shall not be sufficient. There was a limit to the number of ice ploys she could generate at once. She could not let that labor go to waste. Fulfilling the purpose of the footholds, she then shall be met by that which was endless, Emilia. I get it, Volcanica. Thou, who hath reached the top of the tower. Step forth through the first floor, almighty petitioner. Yet another tail whip drew near Emilia, to whom a great idea had just occurred. Emilia somehow evaded it by borrowing the ordinary power of the footholds, and, bringing forth the new foothold she had thought of towards the pillar, she ingeniously grasped that hand by extending her own hand. Emilia, please, soldier-san. Responding to that voice of Emilia's, the one to creak its arms constructed of ice was an ice warrior taking after Subaru, having been generated yet again after being burnt to annihilation, but merely its upper body. Not simply a foothold. but an existence which functioned as both a foothold as well as a reliable ally of Emilia's that was. The course of ice with simply their upper bodies growing out of the pillar, one after the other. Since they simply had their upper bodies growing out of the pillar, and she did not have to create their legs, she could also raise their number to greater than 7. Making around 10 of them grow out of the pillar at once, Emilia borrowed their hands and headed upwards. Emilia, Hia, ya, Shia, all right, why? Borrowing the hands of the upper bodies of ice growing out of the pillar in a literal sense, Emilia climbed towards the topmost surface of the pillar. Meanwhile, Volcanica did attempt to obstruct Emilia, but the men on the pillar hindered it from the side. Captured in its attribute of protecting the pillar, Volcanica was unable to leave the ice warriors on that pillar. The generated ice warriors hurled swords and axes of ice towards Volcanica, and as the divine dragon repelled them, it hunted the ice warriors on the pillar one by one through its tail or forelimbs. Although, whilst Emilia headed for the pillar's top, Emilia. Though this spot is a bit tough, to have overcome the hazard would be somewhat too lively an impression. But with the ice soldier's strength and sacrifice as the foundation stone, Emilia's hands finally reached for the topmost surface of the pillar. Though she would reach the uppermost stratum of the tower in around 10 more meters, the topmost surface of the pillar was in a bent condition akin to that of a rat guard, so climbing hereon would be the deed of utmost difficulty. Though the situation was one wherein even people who specialized in mountain climbing would be troubled, fortunately, Emilia specialized in tree climbing. In the past, her zeal for it had led her to be scolded by Fortuna and Arch. Emilia, the numbness of my fingers is also all right, now I can. Regaining the sensation of her numb fingers, Emilia tackled the bent, unkind pillar. Grasping the hand of the ice warrior growing reversely on the slant, she drifted her legs midair towards the unstable skies. But thanks to the ice warrior's assistance, her climb was stable. What remained was only for Volcanica's obstruction to be Emilia. Hic! That moment, faint slackening and a prank by destiny infiltrated. Volcanica. I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, I ask the will of thee who hath reached the summit. The outbreaking potent jolts were caused by a severe strike into the pillar by Volcanica's tail, whilst it articulated so. It waved impact through the entirety of the pillar, thoroughly fissuring the ice warriors with solely their upper bodies growing out of that pillar, shattering them at once. And neither was the ice warrior lending its hand to Emilia on the slant an exception. Emilia, the hand she had grasped shattered from the tip of its shoulder, and Emilia's body fell, having lost its support. The ice warrior, with a sharp expression of eyes, tried to halt her, but neither of its hands could reach any more. Instantly, suspension enveloped the entirety of Emilia's body, putting Emilia's risky climb of the pillar to waste, invalidating it all and placing her back onto the first layer that was not what occurred. Emilia, Lord save me. The height of the pillar she had attempted to clamber, Emilia was supposed to fall down multiple tens of meters. Emilia inhaled upon that premonition, however. Something caught Emilia's hips unexpectedly quickly. Not an ice warrior. In terms of sensation, all of the ice warriors growing from the pillar had all been shattered. Furthermore, her hands were immediately touching something rugged and rigid. Emilia. Could it be? Volcanica, thou who hath reached the top of the tower. Step forth through the first floor, almighty petitioner. A voice reached her from close proximity, as Emilia confirmed the winds of high heights and the sensation below her hips. Due to the nearness of that voice, Emilia made a delayed realization that she had fallen on top of the divine dragon Volcanica's back. Emilia, hic, stay focused. From here I may be able to. She may, once again, be able to use Volcanica as a stool and reach the pillar. So planned Emilia, but the distress of being unable to execute that with ease descended upon her. Flapping its wings, Volcanica ascended and twisted its body, intending to throw her off. Emilia, enduring the mighty, powerful wind assailing upon her body, Emilia desperately clung to the dragon's spine. Physical wind Emilia had never felt until now. What she was clinging to were scales, every single one of them colossal and tenacious, akin to rocks, and she would not be able to persist for long should things remain this way. Furthermore, Volcanica was merely flying in the sky with freedom. She was not basking in a tail whip, hammer arm, much less its dragon breath. It was merely flying with vigor, seeking to make the clinging Emilia fall. Should she lose to this, it would be far too Emilia. I would no longer be able to look Subaru and everyone else in the eye. Should she heedlessly open her mouth, her lungs might get ruptured by the plunging wind. Her eyes cast downwards, her molars gritted tightly, Emilia thought back to the people she cherished beyond her eyelids. Resolve akin to having to die, but that was not the case. The purpose of Emilia thinking of the people she cherished was so that she could face forward. For her to be given a push on her back and to gain the courage to look ahead. Even whilst being swallowed by the tremendous winds, Emilia forced her eyelids to open. A circumstance wherein she had to pour the entirety of her strength, or she would be unable to even open her eyelids. In its midst, without losing the strength of her amethyst eyes, Emilia dared to open her eyes to discover a means to survive. Humans are beings who end up closing their eyes in times of being crushed by fright and insecurity. But the people whom Emilia cherished depicted in the rear of her eyelids faced forward in precisely such times. People who did not close their eyes in times precisely as those. She must have her eyes remain open. In order to reach for something, in order to hold someone's hand, and Emilia, that weirdo. The whole surface, left and right, everywhere, the spectacle was under the rain of blue. Though Emilia being in skies even above clouds was also a reason, it was also because the divine dragon Emilia was clinging to was clad in brilliant blue scales. Since everything aside from that quickly passed by due to their exceedingly high speed, even Emilia's perception of moving bodies, which could discern even the path of a thrown ball like a seam, couldn't capture the world within itself. Thus, what Emilia's awareness captured was not the world outside of the blue. Volcanica, I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, I ask the will of thee who hath reached the summit. Volcanica soared whilst twisting and turning its body. It seemed the area Emilia was clinging to was around the base of Volcanica's wings. Enigmatically, the dragon did not move its wings with that much engagement. Though it was necessary for birds and insects to flutter their wings for flight, the principle of dragon's flight appeared to be different. It was surely closer to Puck or Roswal's mechanism for flying. If so, Emilia. Roswal used magic. Puck, too, used a mysterious power so. Unfortunately, never had she tried this with Roswal, nor did she intend to. However, for an extensive duration, Emilia had lived and spent time together with her family whom she thought comprised of solely one. For this singular year, they had been separated, and there had been multiple instances of her feeling incredibly lonely. Sometimes she nearly cried at night, but reminiscences provided support through it. And the voice present within those reminiscences showed hope to Emilia in this pressing time. That was Emilia. I'm just guessing here, but could it be that you also don't like to have your neck tickled? The amethyst eyes opened with force, captured the long neck of the divine dragon twisting its frame. Below that great draconic jaw, amidst the uniform blue scales, was a sole white scale. The days of frolicking about with Puck dawned onto Emilia's mind. Stop it, Leah. If you do it so softly, then my concentration will get disturbed, you know. Emilia. Isn't that right, Puck? Accompanied with a responding voice, Emilia concentrated her consciousness. Amidst this mighty wind, Emilia did not possess the strength to directly reach that white scale. However, what she had learnt by the pillar could be resuscitated even should the other party change from an inorganic to an organic substance. Emilia. Soldier-san. Ahead of Emilia's cognizance, the soldiers of ice once again appeared around the white scale. Ice soldiers which were solidly supporting each other with merely their upper bodies, and one that was born in their core steadily extended its hand towards the white scale, Volcanica. Hi-Ran. For the first time, Emilia heard a voice apart from the divine dragon's repetitions. The scene changes. Reverse scale, there existed a phrase so. This phrase, originating from ancient Chinese traditions, spoke of dragons, who were legendary beings, each possessing a singular scale which shan't be touched on their throat, called a reverse scale. A dragon, whose reverse scale was touched, fell into rage and assuredly killed the opponent. Originating from that custom, to touch a part of the opponent which shall not be touched came to be expressed with the phrase, touching the reverse scale. Of course, Emilia possessed no reason to be aware of such origins of historic phrases from a disparate world. She sought to touch the white scale on the dragon's throat in order to muddle the concentration of the opponent, who was vigorously flying about attempting to make her fall, and by an interval of time. However, Emilia, Kyra, screaming as she was hurled into the air, Emilia witnessed the earth and the heavens revolve round and round for her. However, her suspension midair lasted even shorter this time compared to when she had landed on the dragon's spine earlier. Caught by a solid sensation, Emilia took an entirely defensive stance and tumbled. And nimbly standing up at that spot, she remained cautious regarding her environs. Breathing hoarsely, Emilia glanced around her environs. Fortunately, there were no hints of an abrupt attack assailing down upon Emilia. That, too, was a matter of course. At present, Volcanica, the subject of her utmost vigilance, was far, far above. Volcanica, Haran. As if extraordinarily revolted by its white scale being touched, Volcanica agonized as it ascended to higher skies. With the echo of a whale ostensibly crunching the sky, Emilia involuntarily rounded her eyes. Emilia. Puck used to enjoy it, though. Regardless, it was each person's individual response to enjoy it or to not enjoy it. Admonishing herself to not become self-assertive, Emilia affirmed the sensation of her limbs. Tremendously swung about by Volcanica, the blood flow of her body had become slightly strange. Depending on the situation, hindrances in the blood flow resulted in the phenomena of losing vision due to lack of blood flow into the brain. But Emilia had managed to barely hold out. And with that affirmation, Emilia took notice. Emilia, this place is. Upon looking around, Emilia's field of vision was a story above than the time she had arrived at the first layer. The absence of the 5 pillars supposed to be in her environs was proof of her having arrived at an altitude above their apex to name. Precisely, this place was the uppermost stratum. She had reached it in the form of getting dropped off Volcanica's back. The uppermost stratum of Pleiades' watchtower, an untrodden territory at last, Emilia. Hell yeah, I did it. It was well worth working hard and persevering. With a modest reaction to the emotionally moving happenings, Emilia put her hand on her chest and made haste towards the core of the uppermost stratum immediately. Should she act nonchalantly, the agonizing Volcanica may return. Before that occurred, she must discover the trial with the purpose of saving Subaru and the rest. Emilia, please, give me a problem that even I know the answer to. Though Volcanica, having forgotten the trial, too, was a problem. What was another problem for Emilia was whether she would even be able to solve the trial of the first layer in the first place. Bearing that fear, Emilia headed towards the center of the uppermost stratum. And arriving at the base of a pillar extending to the heavens there, Emilia said ah and widened her eyes. There it was, a peculiarity not possessed by the 6 pillars in the floor below. There certainly it was, the enigmatic peculiarity possessed solely by the pillar in the center of this uppermost stratum. It was, Emilia, someone's handprints. The uppermost stratum of Pleiades' watchtower, what was at the base of the pillar in its center, was a black monolith. And on that black monolith, printed were handprints. 6 handprints, of respective differing men and women, had been printed.